Salam Lakam, which is peace unto you all. Ha'irab Tawab La Adam Za'achiakam Yawaman Rachakador Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawan from the JMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam Kaya Malakat Hashemayim Kwarab. Repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call Layam La La Abanawa Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. Bahasham Rocha HaKodash. Wamashan Allah Zakonim Nawa. Wamalakim Sharocha Gadol, which is all praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists. Bahasham in the name Yahweh Shai delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. Zayah Shai, this is Isaiah chapter 52, and we'll give verse 1. And it says, Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion. Put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city, for henceforth there shall no more come into thee the uncircumcised and the unclean. And which it says, Awake, awake, put on thy strength, because ultimately, coming up in America, Babylon the Great, we have learned ways that are contrary to the scriptures, so by subscribing to this truth, essentially it awakens us, all right, and it's essentially us putting on strength. All right, let me get a quick precept. This is Ephesians chapter 2, and we'll get verse 13, and it says, I'll start at verse 12, and it says, I'll start from verse 11. It says, Wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, because, at one point, essentially, we was, again, born into the different customs that we learned in captivity, all right, which that's a similitude of those, that was in the ancient world, you see, or better yet, those that were in the ancient world that were the Israelite foreigners, they were a foreshadowing of us today, all right, because essentially in today's time, we came up learning, different customs and different traditions, contrary to the scriptures, you see, but, by being quickened by the Spirit, we become alive, and essentially we become awake, all right, because in those different ways and doctrines, all right, we were essentially asleep and we were living in a death style. All right, Ephesians 2 and 11, it says, Wherefore remember that, ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands, because back in the ancient world, it was the circumcision, those that understood that they were Israelites. All right, and then, those are the uncircumcision, the ones that, weren't keeping the customs. All right. But it says who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands, because, you had, those in the Holy Land, back in the ancient world that were keeping the customs, and that were in the correct spirit, you see. But then you had those that were in the incorrect spirit, and, they more so was worried about, pleasing men, and, how they looked, on the outward instead of looking on the inward. All right. But it says that at that time ye were without Hamashayach, being aliens from the commonwealth of Yasharallah, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without the Most High in the world. So being without, the Lord Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai, essentially, one will be asleep, one will be without strength, and one will be in a destitute type of a state, to where they will be living a death style and essentially just hanging on by a thread, by default, because, the doctrines and philosophies that push forth nothing but, a lifestyle of being diseased, all right, or being diseased in the mind and in the body, all right. But reading it again, it says that at that time ye were without Hamashayach, being aliens from the commonwealth of Yasharallah, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope without the Most High in the world. But now in Hamashayach Yahweh Shai, ye who sometimes were far off are made nigh by the blood of Hamashayach. For he is our peace, who hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us. All right, because ultimately, again, by subscribing to this truth, we become alive, we become quick, and we become restored, we become awake. You see, and not only that, we are no longer diseased. All right, we become whole. We become one body. All right, and essentially we're made whole, and our body is at peace, and our mind is at peace. Because the scripture go into, be ye all of one mind. All right, which all of those things are synonymous with life, prosperity, good health, and being awake. So going back, let's get back to Isaiah chapter 52, and we'll get verse 1, and it says, Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments. All right, so let's get a quick precept. Let's get we'll get Bon Sirach. We'll get Bon Sirach chapter 27, and we'll get verse 8, and it says, If thou followest righteousness, thou shalt obtain her, and put her on as a glorious long robe. And essentially, this wisdom is likened unto that, that glorious long robe. So essentially this truth, beautifies us. It makes us look good. All right. Scriptures say, who is as the wise man, and who knoweth the interpretation of the thing. The wisdom of a man's face maketh his face to shine, and the boldness of his face shall be changed, roughly paraphrasing. So this wisdom allows for us to shine, and essentially it makes us beautiful in the spirit, which the scriptures essentially go into how the Lord likens Zion into that comely and delicate woman. Comely goes into something that's beautiful, so essentially what makes us beautiful, what makes us appealing to the eye, is essentially, fearing the Lord and being at a good estate with our power. All right. So going back to Isaiah 52 and 1, and it says, Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For henceforth there shall no more come into thee the uncircumcised and the unclean, because ultimately, we're going to be perfected in the kingdom, and we're not going to go off. All right, this is Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 26. And it says, And I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning. Afterward thou shalt be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city, in which, it starts with this truth. It starts, by essentially the elect being awakened, all right, and putting on the strength. All right, again, the strength, going into, the scriptures. All right, that's what allows us, to live. That's what allows us to, to have that strength, and that's in the kingdom. All right, by having the law, statutes, and commandments in our inward parts, we're going to be able to fully, fear the Lord 100%. Whereas, in this captivity, we're in a weaker state. All right. And, we're not able to serve our power, how we would like to. You see, in the kingdom, all right, we're gonna be again, have the law, statutes, and commandments in our inward parts, and we're gonna be able to serve the Lord, at 100%. All right. So going back to Isaiah 52 and verse 2, and it says, Shake thyself from the dust, arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion. All right, which at dust represents confusion. But it says, Shake thyself from the dust, arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion. So ultimately, by ridding ourselves of that confusion, the ways that we learn in captivity, by default, we're going to be loosening ourselves from the different societal norms and social constructs that essentially had us enslaved. All right, let me get a quick precept. This is John chapter 8, and we'll get verse 32. And it says, And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So Jake, we're no longer held to the societal constructs and societal slavery that has been placed upon us. All right, we no longer have to, live after the different paths and ways that were set before us, whether that be, from family, friends, society. All right. The ways of Esau, Edom, essentially by subscribing to this truth, we become free, we become whole. All right. And we are ridded of any type of diseases. All right. Going back to Ephesians, the second chapter, essentially, by subscribing to the Lord Yahweh Shai, essentially we become whole again, going back to, how that that middle wall of partition is broken down, So reading it again, Isaiah 52, and we're at verse 2. And it says, Shake thyself from the dust, arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion. All right. So let's get another precept, and then we'll go ahead and close. Za'ayawab, this is Job chapter 10, and we'll get verse 21. And it says, Before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death, a land of darkness as darkness itself, and of the shadow of death without any order, and where the light is darkness. Reading it again, it says, before I go whence I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and of the shadow of death. Because going back to Isaiah 52 and verse 2, it says, shake thyself from the dust, or shake thyself from the dust. And that dust represents confusion, which the land of confusion is America, Babylon the Great, and America is also the land of darkness. All right, let's go into this word for darkness. And it says, Chashak, H28:22, and it says darkness, obscurity. It says misery, ignorance, wickedness, destruction. All right. It says misery, adversity. All right. And so going back to Isaiah 52 and 2, it says, shake thyself from the dust. That dust represents that confusion, which is also synonymous with that misery, that darkness, that ignorance, because the ways, again, that we learned in captivity puts us in a misery type of a state, subscribing to Esau school systems, which really it just serves as a trick bag. It doesn't. One may get a degree, but it's worldly. It's worldly wisdom. All right. Another thing, if one was to subscribe to being, what's called a foodie in this society, somebody that likes to eat food. Well, in this society, people like to, or different restaurants, they put pork on everything, but it's basically bacon on every burger. So that might be a lifestyle that's pushed in Esau society, to where, someone is heavily, into eating pork. Well, in the end of that, it's going to be misery, destruction. All right. And it's going to be a very sorrowful life. For one, it's going to be a sorrowful life, because that comes with all, for one, it's against the scriptures. All right. For two, all right, that leads into, all types of body ailments. And then, in the end, that person will essentially be destroyed, Also, another type of thing that's pushed in America, Babylon the Great, in that dust. All right, putting the woman over the man. All right, while it may, it may sound good, to those that's in that type of lifestyle, but in the overall grand scheme of things, all right, that's not doing things decently and in order, So it goes into the dust, because it's of the dark, it's of darkness, it's of obscurity, because it's not in the order that the Lord set. All right, so that essentially serves as how it's misery, darkness and sorrowful. All right, so finishing it out, verse 22, a land of darkness as darkness itself, and of the shadow of death without any order. All right, going back to the precept that I quoted, let all things be done decently and in order. Because essentially, going back to that dust, Esau understands, what's right and what's wrong, because essentially he has turned everything upside down, so to turn it upside down, you have to be aware of the correct order. All right, it's just that 2/3, they don't understand that they understand that they're following the ways, or they may not specifically understand that they're following the ways of the heathen, but in an indirect way they are. All right, and just by default, all right, they're subscribing to the ways that are contrary to the scriptures. They essentially are following after their father, the devil. All right, because Esau, Edom is the physical counterpart of Satan, and essentially he pushes darkness throughout the planet Earth, which America, Babylon the Great, acts as the epicenter. All right, which essentially that can be corresponded with Isaiah, the 60th chapter, and the second verse. It grows darkness to people. All right, people are the darkest here in America, Babylon the Great, but then also in the respective parts, around the world, but just pretty much the point that, you got 2/3 following Esau, Edom, in these different altered ways of life, but they're going to be destroyed to their own detriment. All right, so continuing on, it says, a land of darkness is darkness itself, and of the shadow of death without any order, and where the light is darkness. All right, so where the light is in this place, all right, essentially that's darkness. It's dark. All right, the things that would be pushed forth as something that's good. Because light represents health. Light represents something that's good. Because if it was dark, it's going to give you. It's going to give negative vibrations. You see, so light is synonymous with something that's good. So light is supposed to be good. You see, but here in verse 22 it says, and where the light is as darkness. So the good things, the benefits here in America, Babylon the Great, those things really go back to something that's non-beneficial. So, and that's essentially why the scriptures essentially detail this place as Maratayam for double rebellion. Because it pushes forth nothing but wickedness. But pretty much going back to the point of the lesson, I wanted to go into Isaiah 52 verses 1 and 2, because ultimately the Lord is he has put this truth out in the world, or and the elect is essentially taking hold to the strength. All right. And going into verse 2, it says, shake thyself from the dust. All right, which essentially those are the different ways that we have learned in captivity. You see, and by default, by subscribing to this truth, it allows for us to stand upon our feet. So, I just wanted to go into that Isaiah 52 verses 1 and 2. I don't want to zaza banaya Apollo is what that was a beautiful edification to the spirit. Wa I don't want to zaza atam yash like la tawab as well. You have a good night. Wa shalom lakam, which is peace and to all. Shalom, shalom.